Hey everybody, it's me, Chief Josh Yola, aka Josh.0, whatever you want to call me is fine with me. And today we're talking about the 10 eras of professional wrestling. Specifically, we're ranking the 10 eras of the WWE. And this idea was actually brought about all thanks to you guys. This was brought on by somebody's comments in the last video that we did, which has over 10,000 views. Thank you so much, by the way. I kept my promise. I said that I responded to everybody's comment, and I think so far I've met that promise, and the same goes for this video. Do you agree, disagree? Let me know in the comments below, and let's talk about it. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. So let's start off. Number 10. Now, keep in mind, some of these names and the years or stuff like that are just based on my best guess, my best estimation. Some are kind of universally accepted, and other ones, I just wanted to pick a good name for the era and pick my best guess for the year. So, number 10, I'm calling it the prehistoric era, the Capital Wrestling Corporation. This was back in from 1952 to 1963. This is the seeds of everything, the foundation on which the WWE was built. Vince McMahon's grandfather is the one who built this. This involves a lot of old timers, names that you may not hear very often, guys like RUTHLESS, Nature Boy Buddy Rogers, who Nature Boy Ric Flair pretty much modeled his entire image after. But this is a time when professional wrestling was treated more like the mafia, where you had the 5 families and they each controlled a different territory. And wrestlers, they wrestled in their territory, and if they wanted to go into another one, then they all had to meet together and they talked about it and stuff. And it was taken very, very seriously. But it wasn't very well known. Outside of the territories themselves, there was no global, certainly no international knowledge of these guys. And remember this, there were no television advertisements, there wasn't anything like that. So it was very regional in that way, but it had to lead to something, and thankfully it did. Number 9, the PG era from about 2008 to 2014. I know everybody really dogs on this era as the worst, absolute worst, but you have to remember, this era came in the wake of the horrific Chris Benoit incident where he murdered his wife and his son and then killed himself. The WWE had a huge steroid scandal on their hands that they were trying to settle. And then Linda McMahon was also running for the Senate. So you compile all of this stuff together onto Vince, and he had to do something. He simply couldn't keep going with the kind of edgy programming that they had been doing for the last few years, almost the last decade prior to this. So he needed to make some kind of change. And so they brought in more babyface angles, and they just tried to tone it down a little bit. But I think the roller coaster had been going at such a fast pace for so long, this sudden slowdown seemed odd. And so to a lot of fans who had gotten used to something that we had seen before, they weren't ready for it, and they weren't comfortable with it. And we did get a few good matches here and there, but for the most part, people would rather forget about this era. Number 8, the WWWF era. This was the Worldwide Wrestling Federation from about 1963 to when I was born, 1979. There's a little bit of respect for guys in this era, like Superstar Billy Graham and Bob Backlund and Bruno Sammartino. Obviously, these guys were Hall of Famers and things like that, and they got to lead into a lot of things. And this is what is actually going to sow the seeds for future wrestlers who are going to be big names, guys like Hulk Hogan. This is where the WWF is starting to find its identity. It's starting to put an end to the regional squabbles that they had in previous promotions, and they're starting to cross over, and people are starting to compete in other areas around the country and starting to make their names known to different people, and it's starting to build up an audience. And ultimately what Vince wanted to do, and what he does in a later era, is he wanted to unify all these territories and become one, instead of everybody kind of being their own boss. He wanted to be the boss of everybody. Number 7, we had the Invasion from about 2001 to 2002. This is when the WWE had won the Monday Night Wars, and so they assimilated all of those wrestlers, Borg style, into their show. But what they tried to do is they tried to recreate the same lightning in a bottle that WCW did have. They wanted to take all the best parts of it and leave the scraps. So they brought in the NWO, they brought in Goldberg, and the Steiners were there, and all these other people. And some of them simply didn't work. They didn't mesh well because the roster became so crowded. And so you had things that worked and some things that didn't. And some guys just chose to either go to TNA or just simply go away, rather than stick around on a crowded roster that didn't have room for half of these guys. But the good part about it was that we did see the rise of some pretty big names, guys like Brock Lesnar, John Cena, Batista, Randy Orton. They all came in around this time, and we were able to finally see them become the stars that they would be. Number 6 is the era we're in now, the reality era, from started about 2014 until now. A lot of people, they don't like the era we're currently in. They akin it to the PG era, or sometimes they say it's the same. I say it's different only because what the reality era has done is the expansion of the WWE network and just social media in general, and how the WWE has taken advantage of it and worked it in their favor is what makes it the reality era. The rise of shows like Total Divas, which I'm not a fan of, but it does great ratings, so it's very successful for them. The WWE network has expanded overseas into many other countries and allowed them to create a lot of original programming. So what we can't forget is that at the end of the day, the WWE is a business. It's in the business of making money. And they're making money hand over fist right now. So if that's the ultimate goal, they're succeeding. Number 5, the Monday Night Wars. Now we're getting into the good stuff. From 1993 to 1997, during my high school years, we got to watch WCW and WWE. Nothing breeds successful television like competition. And this was what made this era one of the best. That's why it's top 5. Because WCW was killing WWE in the ratings. The WWE was still in their WWF mode where characters were very colorful and animated and things like that. WCW went edgy. They knew that if they wanted to compete with the big dog, they had to do something different. And they really did. And they were just bringing it night after night. And if you've ever seen the Monday Night Wars specials on the WWE Network, you'll see that WWE got killed week after week, and they just didn't know how to respond. They didn't know what to do and how to compete against this seemingly fledgling organization of WCW. So it was a lot of fun to see them compete against each other. We did get some of the best WrestleMania matches we've ever had, though, during this era. Bret Hart and Stone Cold Steve Austin at WrestleMania 13, Shawn Michaels and Bret Hart at WrestleMania 12, Shawn Michaels and Razor Ramon at WrestleMania 10. So it certainly wasn't all bad. Number 4, I'm calling this the Vince McMahon era, from 1979 to 1984. This is when we saw what would become WWE. In 1980, he founded TYT Sports, which is sort of the father of all these things that Vince McMahon does. He applied for the initials WWF so that he could start that show. He purchased the Capital Sports from his father. Remember, that was started in 1952 by his grandfather, so he bought that. And this is when we saw the rise of televised wrestling. This was Vince's vision. This was his dream, was to take all of these matches that people didn't get to see and put them on television. And so he used revenue from advertising, VHS, like tape sales and things like that. And that's how he funded this operation, this dream of, hey, I want to get these guys known around the country and one day around the world. And this is how we can do this, is let's use this supremely powerful medium and let's put pro wrestling on TV. And I don't think Vince really gets the credit for doing this, simply because a lot of people just don't know that before this time it just wasn't happening. And we have him to thank for it. Number 3, ruthless aggression. This is one of the few eras that was actually dubbed this by name, and it was dubbed by Vince, the ruthless aggression era. This is about from 2002 to 2008. This is when you saw this excess of talent because of the brand extension, because of the alliance or the invasion angle, things like that. So you saw the draft lottery where Raw and SmackDown were split up into 2 different shows. And they essentially became separate programs. They each had their own championships. They each had their own pay-per-views. The entire roster was split, and they did a draft every year, which went on until about 2011. And it was a very confusing time, but they had to do something with the amount of superstars that they had. The ruthless aggression thing was they were trying to capture the magic of previous eras, but still keep somewhat of a PG attitude and not go too crazy, so they didn't advocate. There was no nudity and stuff like that. So we were getting a sort of a watered down version of it, but we got some fantastic matches, and we saw, and that's John Cena's rise to popularity, and this is where that really came into play. Number 2 is the Golden Age. The Golden Age is from 1984 to 1993. This is the age what a lot of people identify with. When they think pro wrestling, they think of guys like Hulk Hogan. They think of Macho Man Randy Savage. They think of guys like some of my favorites, Rick Rude, people like that. This is all the Golden Age. We had Hulk Hogan, who came in 1983 is when he really became a part of the WWF. And then a few months later, I think in January of 1984, he beat the Iron Sheik for the first of his 6 WWF titles. And that showed just how much Vince had faith in him. Now, he had met Hogan back in '79. He knew who Hogan was. But Hogan had wrestled in New Japan. He wrestled in a couple other promotions. And Vince saw a lot of potential in him as a showman. And he wanted him to be the face of this new thing he had made called the WWF, the World Wrestling Federation. And he sure enough did. He did it by giving him the belt, and he would hold on to that thing for a really long time. And this is also when we saw the very first WrestleMania, and Vince had so much faith in Hogan. Hogan main evented 8 of the first 9 WrestleManias. So if people get tired of John Cena, just think about, okay, what if you were living back in those days? But back then everyone loved Hogan. He was the WWF. He was the show, and he was such a good showman, he was able to carry the whole thing. But this is where we would see WrestleMania become the global phenomenon that it is today, until eventually Hogan's ego got the better of him, and then in '93 he jumped ship and went to WCW. And, well, we know how some of that turned out. And drum roll please, the one everybody knows, this one, the one we haven't mentioned yet. Of course, it's the Attitude Era, which I said goes to about 97 to 2002. I think for a lot of wrestling fans, especially people my age, this was their absolute favorite era simply because it was Raw is War. It was WWE unhinged. It was no holds barred. It was everything. It was the apex of the Monday Night Wars. It's the turning point. In '97, this is when WWE finally found their footing. They found something. They found stars in Stone Cold Steve Austin and The Rock, and they were able to channel all that energy and do edgy programming with DX, like when DX would drive to the arenas that WCW was taping in and yell at him. I mean, that was unprecedented. They didn't do that. Nobody did that before, but they did. They did stuff that no one was doing in this competition and making it very public that they were competing with WCW, and they were going to do whatever was necessary to get back into the ratings and to get back on top. And man, did they ever. It was so popular that they put WCW and ECW out of business. So whatever they did, all of these things that worked, and again, I highly recommend you watch the Monday Night Wars videos on the WWE Network when you get a chance, because it's a really great example of how these seemingly fun businesses like professional wrestling is taken very seriously, and the kinds of things that they will decide, hey, we got to do something if our business wants to survive. So thankfully, they made all the right, at least most of the right decisions, and it led to some fantastic programming. It led to a lot of teenage boys getting some satisfaction from some of the stuff we saw with the ladies of the WWE and the WWF at the time. And then some of the matches, we got some of the best matches we've ever had. And then, of course, some of the greatest stars we've ever had. Merchandise sales were at an all-time high for them during that period. And it became cool during the Attitude Era to be a wrestling fan, because at previous eras, you couldn't talk about wrestling in school. You couldn't talk about wrestling the way you can now. And remember, this is pre-internet, stuff like that. And so finally, for the first time in a long time, being a wrestling fan was acceptable. And that was a lot of fun. So, do you agree with my list? What do you think the order should be? If you agree, disagree, leave it in the comments below, and I swear I'll respond. I've done it in the past, and I will do it for this one. As always, thank you so much. Follow me on Twitter at Chief Joshiola. You can also look and follow all the articles that I and many other talented writers will write on dailyddt.com. And if you have ideas for other videos, again, leave it in the comments below. Hey, this video was born out of an idea that somebody put in one of the last comment sections. So put it below. TYT Sports will take it into consideration, and we'll go from there. Thanks again, guys. See you soon.